from Norh, and the other one is from Ufuchi.
Okay. So that one's female. Again, you can see just how the body weight just carries differently. The head's bigger, different offset, and obviously, like I mentioned in there, the males carry just that little bit more weight on the shoulder region, which creates that kind of body. But here you can see it's a lot more uniform across everything, whereas that's got that more triangular taper. Again, another nice, really nice example. Shine consistently in all the fins, uniformity on the head. What you do have to watch with these in younger examples, and like when Izumia harvests Yamabuki from a mud pond, they actually come up looking like dirty Parachina because the lack of light in the mud pond causes the colour to sit down. And he has a real problem with this. In autumn he harvests, people go to his fish house and go, what's this? You know, but then within a few months of being indoors, all of a sudden you get the uniformity. But what can happen in the process of a Yamabuki colouring up is you often, like on the head, get a slight variation in the colour before it, and I'm guessing, is there an age difference between them, Lars?
Yeah, new size,
yeah, exactly. So you've got this colour progression coming through. So at like Tosai, Nisai, it can be unbalanced, and that's the problem I've just had selecting the Tosai at my place, in that some of the colour as they started growing is sat down. So I'm seeing areas outside the head where it's a deeper yellow and a lighter colour in the middle of the head, which if you took that on its value, you would reject it if that was, say, a 4 or 5 year old fish. But I can't forget with a Tosai, that colour's still coming through because the general colour on the whole body's not even that strong, which is really, really important. So, but as they start getting to this age, paying a lot of money for an example like that, I would prefer that type of sumi because I can read it. It's like a Dainichi show. When you see that kind of sumi on Dainichi, we know exactly where sumi will come, because where we see white skin now, there is no sumi at all, and that will forever stay that way. Even to the point where we can see a bit of sumi there, but this will always stay that way. So it is a little bit more predictable. You can even see on the head, look, where you've actually got white skin and where you've got sumi, because it's starting to break. We can actually see that under the skin as well. So if you are, say, going to go heavy on a variety like that, try and go for that style. But if you like, yeah, a wild ride, the other type of sumi is absolutely fantastic. So that's what I'd say on them three. Any questions? There we go then. For me, I think that might be one of the best fish Lars actually has here. He might be surprised to hear me say that. No, honestly, that is superb. That is really, really, probably one of the best Chago I've seen in years, to be honest. That coloration is really rare and hard to find as big examples as well.
I have the pictures.
Really? Nice. That is honestly so difficult to find. The scale line, really perfect. Really, really, really perfect. Marihiro Chagoi for me, so I don't know if you know, Marasei Koi Farm, Marihiro is the younger brother. So the Marasei Chagoi is probably the most dominant and prominent in Japan. But they generally produce like a more of a green kind of colour overall. What Marihiro did the first time I saw it, but for me the Marasei Chagoi of years gone by, the problem with them was always the head, I don't think was big enough. They grew massive, a metre easily, but they had the problem I kind of spoke about earlier, whereas the head never looked big enough, so you got this small head on this huge body and they look a little bit strange. What I saw when first time I saw 2-year-old Chagoi, it's such a stunning proportion to the rest of the body, and you've still got, you know, such growth to come, but you've got an amazing line, so that thing will pack on size but hold that proportion. That head will always sit in proportion to the rest of the body, and that's, to be honest, what makes that so special. And he's the only Chagoi line in Japan for me that produces that type of body where the head is as powerful as it needs to be when they get big. The only problem is it produces so few every year, and if I could get them en masse, I would. And you get a lot of nice colour variations from him. I've seen that colour, I've seen the lighter colour, you get a lot, but I've seen quite a few like that come from him now, but rare beasts. You can see, look, the Fukarin is so well, developing so well in between every scale. Like I say, that scale line is perfect. There's a few little blemishes on it, but that's to be expected. It's completely normal, especially with a darker colour of Chagoi. But everything about that for me is so good. It's a real top koi, is that one. Kaku, again, a really, really difficult variety. I think probably one of the toughest in Japan. They're a natural Kaku line. They're a very, very stumpy fish. I'm not sure if that one possibly a male fish. It feels like it might be. Female examples with that, especially when they get the egg from more traditional lines like Kaneko. They hold a very heavy belly line and struggle to grow. It's only been in recent years when Omasako and Konishi's kind of come into the game, they've really kind of ironed that out. Konishi, to be honest, was the first one that created the big Kaku, and then Omasako actually took Konishi parents to create the base of their lineage, and they've done a phenomenal job at ironing out the body line on them now, where we've got some super big growing Kaku. The big thing with the Kaku is shine is really important. I think people make a mistake of thinking everything has to be clean, as in snow white in the fins and the head. We've actually seen in Japan more and more now where it's having sort of the dark fins, the sumi in the fins is really acceptable if the rest of the fish is of a really, really high standard. But again, with them, you want the shine in the head, in the fins, across the whole body. Again, not too dark, too young, because they will naturally darken. So again, a little bit lighter as they're younger, and that Matsubamon pattern eventually comes through stronger and stronger with age. Gomo, to be honest, absolute nightmare of a fish. They really, really are. You see such few, especially as you move to the Budo Gomo, like that is. Gomo more prominent. Izamiya does a cracking job. He's got a cracking lineage of Gomo. Takigawa from years back as well. I don't think he still produces them, but he had some monstrous ones. But as we get into Budo Gomo, really, you've got Ofuchi, Sakazumi, and Mariju. Mariju probably makes the best coloration and body shape, but Ofuchi probably makes the sort of most prominent quantity. Is that Ofuchi?
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes the most prominent kind of number, if you like, and probably the best kind of robed pattern with his Gomo. Sakazumis are a bit more of a mismatch. You get a lot of Gomo, some that sit in between, but they are tough. For me, it's kind of like a lot of the rules go out the window. They don't really grow so well, so you forget a lot of them elements. You just want a nice body setup if you can get it, and a pattern, again, lighter when they're younger, but with a lot of them you've just got to see, but expect a lot, especially if you're growing them from Tosai. A lot will just go to nothing. And probably get overrun. The white skin will go and go dark. They're a really, really tough variety, to the point where I actually stopped buying them because, yeah, they just get nothing really that pleasant out the end of it. So, Gomo are different, but again, you're selecting them, and realistically, you're picking young Kaku with shimmies when they're young, and we're just, gambling on what's going to happen at Nisai, and then at that point we can really see and progress on from there. But, yeah, 3 challenging varieties there, but that Chago really is exceptional. Beat me to that one, Lars. A few years ago I also started Koi Talk magazine, which you may or may not be familiar with. It is primarily in England, although we do ship it out. And that happened alongside my YouTube channel as well, because the whole thought was, looking at the situation of koi keeping in England, it was the educational side of things was incredibly poor. I just found we was in a situation where hobbyists were educating hobbyists through social media, but I just saw so much bad information being shared around that I thought somebody's got to stop this, and nobody else seemed to be doing it. So that's when I started on YouTube and the magazine all at the same time, and I think to this day it's been really good. And my whole philosophy that I've been trying to promote and do around is the whole idea of keep it simple. I think koi keeping over the years has just added more and more layers of complication, to the point where it's getting really difficult. And I see my farm in England, I've got 60 ponds across 5 different fish houses, and we run the fish farming side of things with just 3 people, myself and 2 others. And we're not very stressed people every day, not as stressed as I see some koi keepers who just have 1 pond. and that really bothers me, you know, because of the fact with 3 people we can keep 60 ponds of koi, you know, tens of thousands of koi in such good condition, and then it seems such a struggle for 1 pond. But I understand it, you know, there's so much information coming from so many different directions. You have influencers of people trying to sell products because it's the new latest thing, push it, sell it, and it just leads you guys in absolute crazy directions, really. So, yeah, through the content that I've done, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with it, but my main area in koi is really koi selection and raising fish. That's the side for me which I believe is the place to kind of really focus in on. And what I tend to do, as well as to keep it simple, I have another saying where everything I do is fish first. Every decision that I make for the koi and for the pond is based on what the koi need and not what I want and what I need. And I think that's just an area where things can start to go really wrong, to be honest. Just then speaking to Lars about his pond outside, because instantly, you know, the first thing I've noticed when I saw the pond this morning was the huge amount of aeration bubbling out of 3 bottom drains. And that's where you get the first idea of this concept. So the whole the aerated bottom drain system that creates a vertical current, basically this kind of motion, and then the way that returns were typically taught to be built in a tangential motion, so creating a vortex in the pond. This whole system was designed not for the fish, but for the idea of waste removal from the pond. When in all reality, when you see it in action, it's not actually that efficient. It's no more efficient than just having a still pond, pretty much. But what this also does is creates an unnatural current for the koi. So we've got this is not the natural fish. This is pushing against the fish. You know, in both ways, it's not where they want to be. They naturally, generally in nature, if you see them in a mud pond, they have no pressure. There are no flow returns. There's just surface area to swim. What they want to do is swim. Another side to that as well, as I've just sort of mentioned, is the huge amount of power these days, which is becoming a bigger problem it takes to create that level of aeration, and it's basically just not necessary. What is better for them is a one-directional current, so from basically one end to the other, with a decreasing level of velocity at the same time. So the aeration system that I'm tending to use more, and we're seeing more of all the breeders, is a one-directional flow. So every return in the pond, the water returns and the aeration all starts at one end. So if this is the pond, everything returns at that end. Bottom drains can still be positioned wherever you need them, that's not the problem. But everything is at one end, so we've got the flow at its most powerful, and then it slowly decreases as we get down to this end. That is what's best for the koi. Absolutely no hesitation, and when you create that kind of environment, you will see a difference in the way they swim. Because the first thing I saw this morning is the majority of those fish all swimming on the outside of the pond, trying to basically escape the current for the best part of it. The minute that's all turned off, they start using the whole environment, and it's actually a lot more relaxing and a little bit less stress for them as well. So I hate to tell you that, because most of you have probably got that kind of setup and system already in place, but we are now seeing it more and more in England that people are changing the aeration side more than anything, just to go to one end and noticing the huge difference that it can make. And from a current perspective, it's actually fascinating to see the amount of velocity one small air bar at one end can actually make. It's incredible. Obviously it pushes against the wall and comes across, but when you actually see the flow pattern, it's amazing what it produces, and from a relatively small air pump as well. So yeah, that's kind of my philosophy on all that. Keep it simple. The keep it simple side comes from looking at filtration. Like I say, I think things have got more complicated. That to me is, I in life love technology in general. It's fantastic. Where I don't like technology is creeping into my koi keeping world, because I think it causes a lot of complication. Lars won't like me saying this, but you know, the age of drum filters is exactly one of those things that you know. There are great elements to drum filters, that the fact they make less maintenance for you guys, but for me there's just all these elements. There's more and more things in one of those drum filters that can go wrong. That's happened to me. That's more because when they were relatively new when I got the drum filters, and they're actually quoted, every drum filter that I know of is quoted based on flow rates, which is based on the amount of drainage you can put into it and the water that you can pull through it. That's the way I bought mine at the time. They were new to me as well. And the problems I encountered have been because simply the drum unit itself is not big enough for the pond and the way I use the pond. So because these are heavily stocked ponds with huge amounts of food, the amount of waste passing through is phenomenal. That's not something you guys will generally encounter, but it did highlight some problems for me with the drums, and that was because the physical unit itself is just not big enough. Although the flow rate is actually well below what it's capable of doing, the amount of times it's cleaning causes all the issues. So there is just one issue. I see other parts where that's now taken to a concept where I'm seeing, you know, ponds being built and 3 bottom drain lines being put into one filter because the cost of those filters are so expensive. You wouldn't want, my concept with all that is to take one bottom drain line and run into one filter. So we make sure we've got the maximum pull and efficiency on that line. Other problems I've seen this has created in potential water quality issues as well, because the combi systems, as they're called, where we've got like the moving bed next to the drum, although again it's very convenient, because of the nature now of people pulling higher flow rates through a drum filter, which makes sense mechanically, but when you put a biochamber in between it and you're still pulling the same flow, the problem is there we create a very, very low retention time in the biological filter. And this is also a huge problem. The size of it as well means there's not a big water volume, so you combine that with the high flow rate, the retention times are nothing. And this is when we then start to see problems with low levels of nitrite, potentially even water quality, clarity issues as well, because water's just not spending enough time in the filter. It's also highlighted another potential issue in that biological filters also play a huge part in the mechanical filtration of your pond. This is something that not a lot of people actually consider. Drum filters, I'm not sure, Lars, what kind of microns do they filter down to?
Normal 70.
Right, I don't pay too much attention to this stuff. So 70 microns, there's still no better biological filtration, so the biofilm that will sit on your K1 or whatever media it is that you've got will filter down to 1 micron. The particles in your water are one of the other main food sources for biological filtration. They need to be feeding on all this stuff. And the more and more and more of it that's getting stripped out leaves less food available for this biological filter. And then because we're pulling the water through it so quickly, there's no chance for it actually to feed on what's going past. It's really simple, there's nothing complicated to it, it's just logically it makes sense. When the water goes like that through it, there's no chance for it to get all of anything. When it slowly passes through, it's got the chance to collect more from the water before it comes out the other end. So this is where I kind of see the commercialism of koi keeping, and you know, products need to be produced, people need to make money, it's understandable, it's business, but in reality it's actually making things probably more complicated and creating more problems in the process. The systems that I use back in England, the turnover rates are actually another issue that we've seen. It's fascinated me to see how much people are paying for huge pumps, paying for basically to achieve huge turnover rates in ponds. It's just not necessary. It's really not necessary. I recommend a turnover rate in your pond of around once every 2 hours for the majority of all koi keepers. I actually still use that turnover rate in ponds where I'm heavily stocked and feeding over 1 kilo of food per day. Because this is the only circumstances really, turnover rate wants to increase as you increase feeding and stocking. That's the only time. It makes sense again, if you're feeding via an auto feeder every 2 hours, that means every 2 hours there's a huge surge coming out basically. We need to process that faster. But just more fish, more food, more waste, it's more pollution, we need to pull it through. I don't know many koi keepers in England that get close to feeding any of the levels I do. A couple of years ago I was actually growing Neosori, you may have seen the video. This pond was feeding at its highest point, it's a 3,500 gallon pond, it was feeding 2.35 kilos per day at the peak. And that was running, the turnover rate of that pond was once an hour, combined with the shower filter and the drum filter. So I still have ponds to this day, I say, that are growing fish really successfully with high feeding levels that just turn over once every 2 hours. That's it. There's no need for the complication, huge different pump lines. All those systems are, the 3,500 gallon ponds that I use are a single bottom drain to a drum filter, they're the ones I speak of. That then passes to a fluidised bed that's homemade. Generally, they have anywhere from 300 to 500 litres of K1 media in there, and then that simply returns via one pump through the UV back into the pond. And then there's 2 air pumps per system, one which drives the fluid bed and one which drives into the pond. That is it. There's nothing more complicated than that. And that's the kind of results. You know, we're raising towside from kind of 12 to 15 cm up to 50 cm within a 6-month period. Heavily stocked, heavy feeding, water changing. I don't know what the water's like here in Denmark, to be honest with you. Mains water in England is absolutely terrible, and it's getting worse. That's a big problem. We've also identified, because not only is it the chlorine, the chloramines, and all the other chemicals in the water, heavy metals is a huge problem. And again, a concept in England of trickle feeding into the systems has become really prominent over a number of years. That was educated from people because they said that's what the Japanese do. That is correct, the Japanese do trickle feed. A lot of them actually rely on trickling water in constantly. But what's the difference between the Japanese and the water in England? Most of the Japanese breeders are using pure underground water that's not contaminated. At the case of NND in Japan, you know, them guys, their facilities sat on underground water that is actually spring water. That's how good it is. It's phenomenal. They've got that to use as much as they want at their disposal. In England, we haven't. We've got this issue. So we see these guys changing so much water, and it's actually causing more problems than good because nobody actually knows what metals are in the water. Absolutely nothing. And this is going in there and building up in levels. So what I tend to do, we purify all the water at our farm. We know the metals aren't actually that bad, it's quite neutral, but I still try and use the minimal amount of water possible, into fresh water into the pond. There are downsides to that, in that you will create more organic staining in your water, and it doesn't always look the best. But what my fish achieve is a skin luster level that is only seen similar to fish harvested from wood ponds in Japan. The shine and everything is so thick, and I believe the big reason there is the less amount of interference possible, the least amount of chemical possible, and then the least amount of what I'm basically going to say is toxic fresh water possible, because all these things ultimately affect mucus, and when mucus becomes unhealthy, it becomes flat looking. When it's really healthy, it's clear, you can't see it, but all you see is an amazing shine.